Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for being here. What a joy to be here this afternoon with two presidents. And in fact, we had quite a week because we had three presidents on campus in the last 2 days, showing their commitment to this institution and their support to us, faculty, in what we do. So thank you, President Cassidy, for taking the time for being here with us today, and please allow me to take this opportunity to officially express my gratitude for what you did for us, even in difficult times, the pandemic, the strike, the challenges of that time, acknowledging our hard work and what we do, and always considering yourself one of us. You will be missed, and I want you to know that. And for those of you who arrived at Bryn Mawr after Nancy Vickers, Kim Cassidy, as a professor of psychology and chair of CAP, was chosen as our provost from President Nancy Vickers while she was concluding.
You owe it all to me.
While she was concluding her second term as a president. So a four-sided president, indeed, and a wonderful gift for us. And Nancy Vickers, grazie per essere qui con noi oggi. Un pomeriggio speciale. She's both President Emeritus and Professor Emeritus of Italian at Bryn Mawr College, where she served from 1997 to 2008. She received her BA from Mount Holyoke College and her PhD from Yale University. Prior to joining Bryn Mawr College, she had taught at Dartmouth and at the University of Southern California. From 2009 to 2014, she was also president of the Dante Society of America. Nancy is a scholar in the fields of literary and cultural studies, and her interests range from Dante to Renaissance poetry to the transformation of the lyric genre as a result of changing technologies. She's the author of a broad array of articles and co-editor of multiple volumes, including Rewriting the Renaissance, the Discourses of Sexual Difference in Early Modern Time, by Chicago University Press in 1986. So let me spend a few words on this volume that resonated very strongly in my scholarship.
Oh,
so
good.
just
Fabulous. That's what we wanted it to do.
Juxtaposing the insights of feminism with those of Marxism, psychoanalysis, and deconstruction, this groundbreaking collection creates new common ground for women's studies and Renaissance studies. And an outstanding array of scholars, literary critics, art critics, and historians re-examines the role of women and their relations with men during the Renaissance. In the process, the contributors enrich the emerging languages of and about women, gender, and sexual difference. These studies challenges patriarchal ideology and patriarchal construction of genders and the overall configuration of power in a given culture as a matter of constant, ongoing negotiation and struggle. And we women know very well the struggle. This feminist approach deeply resonated with me since I read the volume at the beginning of my career and influenced all my future work, both formally in terms of scholarship and teaching, and informally in terms of my personal development as a feminist and as an activist. Nancy, I'm taking this opportunity to let you know that we in the Italian department, in our Renaissance courses, year after year, we continue to teach and read that book.
Huh.
And we appreciate it is the constructive approach within our commitment to cultural changes against sexism and misogyny. Beyond Renaissance work, Nancy has also worked extensively on Dante, which is indeed the reason why today she will be here conversing with our students of Italian 206, 207, From Hell to Heaven, Dante's Divine Comedy, taught by the only one, Luca Zipoli, assistant professor in our department in Modern Italian Studies. And we all read, in fact, this week, this amazing article written by Nancy on Purgatorio 10, that's what the students are reading at the moment, published in the very distinguished journal Dante Studies, titled Seeing is Believing, Gregory Trajan in Dante's Art.
Published 40 years ago.
But still relevant.
But just the same, I mean, every time I pick it up and look at it and I read it, and I sort of say, well, that's smart. Who is she? I'm sorry. I had to
So we are very prepared today. We read, we underline, we know what we're talking about.
Way more prepared than I am. To be said.
So the students are reading this article in the 206, and let me say now a few words about Luca, who is, since arrived at Bryn Mawr College, has organized an incredibly amount of activities for us Italianists here, but also for our Bryn Mawr College community. And I'm very grateful and thankful to you, Luca, for your energy, your professionalism, your knowledge, and your humility. Since we are talking about Purgatorio 10, that's really the top.
Humility lined up, yes.
So the humility of which Dante speaks in Purgatorio 10, in contrast with the pride, those, the evil pride, the evil love of pride. So let me read the two lines that for me are very dear, so part of Purgatorio 10. O superbi cristiani, o proud Christians, di che l'animo vostro in alto galla, why floats aloft your spirit high in air. So Luca is not that. Must be the normal woman. So finally, before leaving the floor to Nancy and our students, I also would like to remind that tomorrow the department has also organized a piano concert in memory of former chair and great friend of ours, Nicolas Patruno and Edwina Ciao. Welcome. We left a lot with Nick. Remember, Nancy?
Yes, we did.
We had a great time together. The concert is composed by Jessie Harvey, Bryn Mawr College alumna, class 2009, and she a piano concert based on Primo Levi's periodic tables, Sistema Periodico. So it's tomorrow night at 7:30 in Great Hall in memory of Nicolas Patruno. And this will be our 28th event of this academic year. I don't know how we did it, but Luca, we are still standing. So Nancy, grazie infinite per essere qui con noi stasera, veramente è un onore speciale averti con noi. Nancy,
Okay. All right. And is this working? Yes, it is.
It is.
Working. Okay, I'm going to begin on a sour note, which is to say that I have decided that I need to warn you that I had a concussion, a substantial concussion, which actually causes me periodically to not be able to find a word or to not be able to sort of carry through on a total sentence. And so your job is that when I am clearly digging around for something and you of course know what it is I'm trying to say, just say it. And that will be a huge help. As I thought about, am I going to, bother them with this or not? But then I thought it would be worse if it just happened. It led me to, I was just teaching the night before last, Ulysses and his trip south to the world without people. This happened to me while I was on my way to Antarctica. And consequently, I'm very lucky to have made it through the moment where the water hit the boat, because all I did was get a concussion, and they all dropped dead. So, success. All right, but that's just to warn you. Now, the students have written some incredibly intelligent questions. So, do we have a process for how we're going to?
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm going to say a few words about it, but often I think they're just way too brilliant for me to even bother to comment. But at any rate, they're very intelligent, very good questions, and I think we can have an interesting conversation about some of the principal qualities of the Divine Comedy. This is my swan song of teaching the Divine Comedy this year, so because it's a lot. It's hard work. Okay, so Luca, carry on.
Absolutely. So.
Hi everyone, welcome to this event. Thank you so much, Nancy Vickers, for being here. Thank you, Roberto, for your too generous introduction, and thank you, Kim, for being here. I will just say that I need to foster humility, because prideful are punished in the Purgatorio, carrying a very heavy weight. So I really don't want to do that for eternity or when I die. So that's why I foster humility. So, as Roberta Ricci said, we are very prepared. Students have prepared 5 short presentations on 5 themes, topics of the Purgatorio. So they will, present their works and they will ask you questions.
And we can have some.
Absolutely. And so I will ask the first group to please come here.
We should introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Rosemary. I'm a freshman at Bryn Mawr, and I might be an English major.
Hi, my name is Liv. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a sophomore, and I'm a philosophy major. And our presentation is on love and purgatory and in connection with Dante's previous works.
Okay. So I started when kind of thinking about this topic in Canto 6, and I noticed the section where Dante learns from Virgil that love and care in the form of prayer, those on earth, can affect the progression of souls in purgatory. So that's kind of initially where I noticed the idea of what love in purgatory is the idea that there's an active love that those on earth can give to those in purgatory to help them move and become more divine as they move up. And then going into Canto 10, which is what we're mostly talking about, we have Trajan rising to heaven thanks to Gregory, which is an extreme form of the love in the form that those on earth can offer to those in purgatory. So, as you say, Gregory's victory is a victory of intercession. It's such as logical that it takes place in purgatory, in the space where the efficacy of prayers of the living to expedite the journey of the dead is an urgent and continuing concern. So that continues the theme of the idea that love in purgatory is generally in an active form, and it comes from those who are still on earth to those who are on the mountain, and helps them move upwards. And then that theme continues. But in Canto 17, we get a more concrete description of love. So Virgil describes what leads to souls ending up on the terraces of purgatory, their sins, as love that has been misdirected or pursued with little or too much gusto. So there are two big types of love in Purgatory, which is love that the sinners have, not love that's projected onto them. So there's natural love, which is unable to err, and elective love. So neither, this is from 17, neither creature nor his creature, my son, was ever without love, whether natural or of the mind. And this you know, the natural is always without error, and the other may err at its chosen goal or through excessive or deficient vigor. So we have a lot of descriptions of love, both earthly and those of sinners, and then we learn how earthly love moves and moves us towards sin or away from sin. So yeah, that's kind of my overview description of love in Purgatory, but I'm not reading.
So in reference to Dante's previous works, he talks about love a lot. There's lots of themes and connections to love. Most notably is in the Vita Nuova. There is such a passive form of love that is shown, and it's this type of idealistic evolution of a man in love. He even says things such as, all of my thoughts are about love, and love slays all of my spirits. This love is so great, it's almost as if it is happening to him and controlling him. And in the Inferno, in the Circle of Lust, in Canto 5 specifically, with Francesca and Paolo, their love is so strong that it's controlling them rather than them almost acting on love. This love is almost acting on them. So we see this type of passive love.
There it is.
That yes.
There we have it.
And our question for you is that you say Gregory's victory is a victory of a love that intercedes, and it's markedly different than the love that Dante explores in the Vita Nuova. And the love there is a type of love about passive admiration. So what do you think changed about Dante's approach to love in the Purgatory? And in other words, do you think that Dante changes from a passive to an active view of love, or are the loves of those who pray for those in Purgatory and those of a poet of the sweet new style different?
I think, this is a really interesting question. I think about it as a progress or as a passage, so that it's not that he is in this state of mind and is in a sort of innocent state of love observing, and then switches. I think it develops over time within him, and so that first phase is like when he, sees this beautiful girl somewhere in Florence and falls head over heels in love with her. She scarcely looks at him, and frankly has no idea that this is going on. This is very medieval, by the way. I mean, we have lots of poetry that lands in this territory of great expressions of love and ideal, relationships with women that you don't know at all, but you just admire them from a distance. And so what I think happens with him is that he goes through a progress where he sees her when they're both 9 years old. Parenthetically, the number 9 is terribly important. And then he sees her again when they are 18 years old. So we're dealing with little preteen love down here, and we're dealing with teenage love up there. And then the next thing that actually happens in the progress of this love at a distance, which is all that it really is that, lo and behold, she dies. So what does Dante do when she dies? First of all, he goes through a period where certainly he's suffering, and he's having great difficulty living a life in Florence with her death ahead of him. But then, as it moves along, he starts to get interested in other things. He starts to get interested, according to some, in other women. Or he falls in love with lady philosophy, which is one of the sort of way that, that's one of the more ridiculous ways that scholars talk about it, but that's, did he stop being true to Beatrice because he fell for lady philosophy, etc. So I think that by the time that we actually see Beatrice, what we're seeing is, she, other than coming to ask Virgil to go take care of Dante and get him through hell on the way, she is at a complete distance from him. I always imagine there's a moment where she theoretically is told by Virgil that she has to go help save Dante. And so not by Virgil, she's told, yes, no. Virgil, wait a second, let me just think my way through this. Sorry, we're having a little brain scramble. She is told by Mary, who goes to Lucy, who then goes to Beatrice to say, and Beatrice is sitting up there in the Empyrean, and says to Beatrice, Beatrice, Dante's in terrible trouble, you have to go do something. You have to go down to Limbo and talk to Virgil and get him sort of moving along. I have always imagined that moment when she says to Beatrice, Dante is in such trouble, that Beatrice looks up at her and says, Dante, who? So there is a kind of progress that it's moving through. And part of that we actually do see in the very last minutes of Vita Nuova, which is because you're exactly right. I mean, what's going on is this distant admiration, fascination, obsession throughout the Vita Nuova. And then we come to the final paragraphs in which somehow out of nowhere he says to us, and I am going to write about her that which never has been written about any woman. Which tells you that he's going to write the Divine Comedy, basically. That Beatrice is at the center of it because it's a conversion narrative and she is the critical person in terms of his conversion. And so that sees us coming out of that state, that Vita Nuova stage, with in the back of his mind the notion that there's something to be done that's really great here, and it's going to be about Beatrice. And so that's why, rather than seeing it as A and then B as separate, I'm seeing it as a kind of continuum that's tough for us to understand because it is so, in our lives, so wacky. But at any rate, that's my sense of, sort of how that moves along. What we've got here, this is the first time most of you are seeing this image, and there you've got Dante and Virgil, and that's on the side of the wall of the Mountain of Purgatory, winding up it as if it were a column, a Roman column. And there's Trajan on his horse and the sort of kneeling widow over on the other side. This is from an utterly exquisite illustrated manuscript that lives in the Vatican and was done in a place that I know that I can't find at the moment. But it has had a very long life in the Vatican Museum. Oh, it's the Montefeltro. So that's the family that had it. So great, thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
This is so much fun. I hope it's not being boring to the rest of you. Me babbling on.
It's not really working. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. 3 people in this room, so it's going to be a little fantastic. My name is Sasha Weissman. I am a first year and a prospective psychology student.
My name is Eleanor Sullivan. I'm also a first year and I'm a prospective classical studies and archaeology double major.
Hi, I'm Ava. I'm a senior and I'm an Italian and studies major.
All right, so we are group 3 and we decided to focus on the role of classical figures in the Purgatorio. So this is not without saying classical figures appear in the entirety of the comedy, but Dante employs a unique kind of practice of calling upon classical figures to serve as examples in the artwork that lines each of the terraces. So this happens in multiple terraces and multiple cantos, but 2 of the most iconic instances, at least to me, appear in Canto 12, in which he calls upon both Niobe and Arachne to serve as prideful figures in which those who are crossing the terrace and repenting look upon them, are reminded of their stories, and that kind of serves to, inspire them. This is not an instance which he does in other places of actually having that character in the flesh. Rather, it's a reference to their story, which is important. So in the case of Niobe, he specifically calls out that he sees her sculpted in the roadway, eyes welling up with grief amidst her dead, 7 sons and 7 daughters. And this is a direct reference to the story of Niobe, in which she was the mother of the king of Thebes and had 7 sons and 7 daughters. And she boasted that she was a better mother than that of Artemis and Apollo. As a result, the 2 siblings came and killed all her children and turned her to stone. And amidst that, she was still crying even though she was turned to stone. So that kind of story of verbal pride. He also calls upon Arachne, saying, "Mad Arachne, I saw you all but turned to spider, wretched on the strands you spun, which did you so much harm." This is, again, a direct reference to Arachne's story, in which she was a great weaver who gained the attention of the goddess Minerva. And when she wove a piece of the affairs of the gods that Minerva felt she could not best, Minerva decided to destroy the weaving. This upset Arachne so much that she attempted to commit suicide. However, Minerva saved her life and turned the rope in which she was going to hang herself into filament for this weaver turned spider. She turns her into a spider to save her life and takes that rope and kind of puts it in her. So this is another example of Dante calling upon an iconic figure, someone, even at this time, many people would have known and know their stories as examples of pride, a simple reference to those classical figures.
The next canto we kind of examined was Canto 21, in which we're introduced to the character of Stasius, which we feel is one of the most notable examples of the way Dante will reshape and warp the history of classical figures within the Purgatorio. Despite being a classical poet, just like other figures we see within the comedy, such as most notably Virgil, who's Dante's guide through Inferno and Purgatorio, Stasius is depicted as being in Purgatory because he was said to have been lying in life and believed in God. So he is not placed in limbo along with like Homer, Lucan, Ovid, Horace.
Dante.
Yeah.
Who somehow manages to get in there himself.
Right.
Even though, yes. Okay.
And then within this canto, both Dante the author and Dante the character makes an explicit note of Stasius's adoration of Virgil, which is, I would say, is a rare, slightly comical instance within the comedy, because Virgil's kind of sitting over there, like, just being like, he doesn't know that I'm here, his celebrity crush. And he's just basically saying that he wishes he could have known him. And for us, I think this brought up some really interesting questions, because why is Virgil, who outside of just being in the Inferno, being presented as a very positive character, but he's still placed in hell? Like, within the entire comedy, Virgil is really the backbone of what's keeping Dante going. Yet he's in hell, and that was an explicit choice by Dante. And we were also kind of examining the question of, like, is Stasius's worship of Virgil, with him getting on his knees and kissing him, heretical, and why is this allowed if Virgil's supposed to be the sinful figure while Stasius is a figure of repentance? And really, I think that Stasius just overall shows that by redefining the historical narrative of these characters, Dante completely changes these characters' legacies and the way we interpret them. Because readers their most familiarity they have with Stasius is from the comedy, are now going to view him and his poetry in an entirely different light than if they had just read it at its core. And I think that's really interesting, because it's really rare and difficult for a work of literature to have enough power to completely reframe a narrative that had already been written by the author themselves.
And then just to go back to your article in Canto 10 and really build upon what everyone else has said before us, I wanted to really briefly talk about Trajan. So this is the quote from the Purgatorio. Depicted there is the glorious act of the Roman prince whose worth urged Gregory on to his great victory. I speak of the Emperor Trajan, with the poor widow at his bridal, weeping in a pose of grief. And I also have some quotes from your article that really made me think about this, presented here on the Terrace of Pride to teach humility. And in the scene, as you were kind of describing earlier, we see Trajan with the widow. He's really there to inspire pride. But then what I thought was really interesting is he shows up again in the Paradiso 20. We haven't quite gotten there in our class yet. We just started the Paradise this week, so we can't speak too much on this. What I thought was really interesting in your quote there is Trajan is undeniably an exemplary figure of a special order in Dante's poem. His doubled appearance is, among exemplary pagans, unique. And I think it's kind of similar to Statius, how Dante's kind of rewriting this. And you were saying earlier, the story is kind of Pope Gregory prayed for Trajan, and that's how he ended up in the Paradiso. It's just very, kind of different. And like Statius, he's rewriting the history because Trajan was alive before the birth of Jesus. And then our question. Just press the arrow. Oh, that arrow. Sorry. Okay. Dante was very intentional with the classical figures he includes in the comedy. How does he reuse and reshape these figures, and what insights does this give us about Dante's goal in writing the comedy?
Okay, question. There are classical figures all over it, needless to say. And I haven't read the Purgatorio for about 3 years. I'm teaching it now, but I'm still in hell. But at any rate, and so consequently, I just want to check in on Arachne and Niobe. Are they in the floor of Canto 12?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, because we should sort of just mention in passing that particular
Absolutely.
piece, because what you have had in Canto 10 is that sort of wall of moving sort of story, Trajan and the widow being one of them, and it's on the side of the wall as if it were on the side of on the side of the column of Trajan, or on the side of a wall in a building in ancient Rome. But then what happens is that when we get to Canto 12, and see what you're seeing in the first of the cantos about pride is that you're seeing the examples of humility. You're seeing the examples of humility. And what you're seeing in Canto 12 are the prideful sort of spread all over the floor, as if you're going through a church where all the people are buried under the... Right. And so as you're walking along, you're seeing these figures presented. And what you're saying is that you're also bringing to it, because they are these critical figures, you're bringing to it long, complex stories that move the whole progress of the poem in some ways forward. So, am I doing that?
Not sure. Maybe should we turn the...
What?
Yeah.
Can you be too close?
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, is it too close?
No, I think just because there are two of them.
Two of us are too close.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay. Where was I? I of course have lost my train of thought, so totally. And so remind me what
I'm Ellen.
I know. I just want to have you say in 5 words what you just told me at great length, which was wonderful. Statius. Oh my God, yes. I love Statius. I have to say, when people ask me what my favorite character in Divine Comedy is, it is Statius, because he is so good for a laugh. And so, and of course, he's just gotten off his terrace, and the whole mountain shakes when somebody graduates out of their spot. And now he's walking his way. He has to keep walking his way all the way up to the top to get into the earthly paradise, so he can go find his spot in heaven. And but he is, of course, just full of life and excitement, etc. And he sees these two figures in front of him, and he walks up, and then he starts babbling. I mean, he's literally just babbling with them. But what he's babbling about is Virgil, and he hasn't got a clue that Virgil is standing there with him. And then he explains to us, and this is the sort of critical piece with him, is that it is Virgil who saved him. It is Virgil who converted him to Christianity, because Virgil wrote some passage misunderstood completely vis-a-vis Virgil's sense of it, that actually converted Statius. And then we have the ridiculous moment in which Dante says, well, that's Virgil. Right? And, he throws himself on the floor and tries to embrace Virgil's knees, and, his arms, of course, go right through Virgil. Virgil's a shade. I mean, it's just such high comedy, and he's so funny and so, he's just a wonderful, wonderful figure. I have also made, over many, many years, a project of asking every classicist that I meet if they have ever read Statius. And to this day, none of them have. So that's interesting. Okay. Now remind me what you were doing. This is my little...
Trajan.
Oh, Trajan. And say a little bit more about Trajan. What aspect of Trajan?
It was kind of his role and how Dante kind of changed his role and put him in the Paradise.
Oh, yes. I mean, there is, just in case you should think that the whole story of Trajan being sent to heaven by the tears of Gregory the Great was very, very contested during the Middle Ages. Aquinas had a very strong position at it. No, absolutely such a thing would never happen. And so consequently, it was a huge fight, this whole question of whether Trajan was saved or not. And so then, just in case Dante should worry that we might think that it's possible that that never really happened, right? When you get up into the heavens, there's a huge eagle in the sky that has a huge eye, and on its eyebrow, the front and then the bottom of the eyebrow are both pagans. At the front of the eyebrow is Trajan. So Trajan comes back for another visit. And then at the other side is somebody named Ripheus that no one's ever heard of. He comes up as half a line in the Aeneid. Justitissimus Unus, the most just of all, Ripheus. That's all that's ever said about Ripheus, except that there he is. So these kinds of figures just play such, what's interesting about what you're saying, such different roles. They work in such different ways within the poem. So thank you. Very interesting. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here, first of all. We really appreciate it. It's such an honor.
Thank you so much for inviting me. There's no reason that it's an honor. I'm a has-been. But this is really a treat for me. I'm having so much fun, so thank you.
I'm Eleanor. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a junior. And I study English and Italian.
I'm Lucy. I'm a Haverford student, a sophomore, studying comparative literature.
So we thought a lot about the narrative structure of the poem for this part of the presentation. And something we talked about at length in class, especially as we approach Purgatorio, is the verticality of the comedy. Obviously geographically, but also narratively and thematically in a lot of ways. And of course, the descent into Inferno is vertical, but I think the concept is best illustrated in Purgatory, in the way each Paris kind of layers upon the previous. And as Dante and Virgil ascend up the mountain, we as readers also are able to then revisit certain sins and moral themes from a gradually higher and higher perspective, geographically, also stylistically, morally, divinely. And so something we wanted to bring up in Seeing is Believing is your discussion of Trajan's column, and various 14th and 15th century illuminations of different cantos of the comedy, which you wrote imply a parallel between two forms of epic. First, that of Roman sculptural epic told in a counterclockwise ascending spiral, and second, that of a Christian literary epic representing a counterclockwise ascending spiral. And so, in a lot of ways, this, accumulation of history represents this verticality in that it's not a linear progression, but kind of a spiraling of history. And something that we discussed in class is how many scholars have proposed a kind of vertical reading practice of the comedy, which instead of more traditionally, perhaps more logically, reading all the way through Inferno and then Purgatorio, Paradiso, instead starting from Canto 1 of Inferno and then reading Canto 1 of Purgatorio and
Canto
finally
1 of Paradiso.
Exactly, and then
they
choose
lots of interesting stuff.
Yes, yes, it's very fascinating. So, for the next slide, we continued on this thread, pointing to another place in Seeing is Believing, where you kind of identified this vertical spiraling in Dante's work as well. He wrote, "What seems clear, however, is that whatever his model or models, Dante points through quotation with little modification to an extended textual tradition, and in doing so, asks that we provide the appropriate context." So, in this way, we thought about kind of understanding the comedy as a palimpsest, perhaps a purgatorial layering of various works of antiquity and philosophical and theological teachings, and then of course Dante's own words, as producing a narrative that doesn't necessarily progress linearly, but kind of spirals around itself in this accumulation of history.
Another kind of structural aspect that I'm thinking that we were thinking about is kind of building off of some of the earlier group's thoughts on art, but the both literal and metaphorical centrality of the arts in the comedy. And so two kind of moments in Purgatorio in which we pointed these out are obviously in cantos 10 through 12, sort of discussing the appearance of these divine images, and then later in cantos 22 through 24, with Statius again, the discussion of another form of art, poetry, and that centrality for kind of Dante's purpose in this comedy. And sort of doesn't seem to be a coincidence that these issues come to the forefront in the central cantica of the three, sort of as a way of highlighting their importance in the comedy. And then, of course, there's kind of building off this verticality concept. We just wanted to point out a couple of these parallels in the same cantos, same number cantos in Inferno and Purgatory, starting with a pretty famous one in cantos 5 of Inferno and Purgatorio. We have these two stories of Francesca and La Pia, these kind of women love stories that end very tragically with their death at the hands of their husbands, but there is sort of a different treatment in what they get to say, the length of Francesca's monologue versus how brief La Pia's speech is, and their kind of resonances. And then earlier and later in the third cantos, we kind of have a difference in how Dante is interacting with Virgil, this guide, kind of going from this Inferno 3 more like reverential, like a need for a guide, to a slightly more independent traveler through these worlds, but layering that. And lastly, kind of also famously in the sixth cantos of Inferno and Purgatorio, the political cantos, Dante again brings up and then returns to the kind of political turmoil of Florence and then Italy. And so just a few examples to kind of emphasize how these are building on each other and like adding meaning to each other as we get higher and higher. Yeah. And so our question for you, in your scholarship, do you prefer to take a linear or vertical approach to the spiraling narrative of the comedy? And how do you understand Dante's discourse about the same sins and moral questions to evolve across the various canticas?
Okay, that's a good question. The vertical piece, I mean, you're on to what has been a big movement in Dante studies that sort of takes shape around 2015 and works on and up from there. And it's what it has produced is some really brilliant material where there are clear, I mean, part of what's so incredible to figure out about this poem is the complexity of the way things are put together and the way they are put together in very, very purposeful ways. So I leapt immediately upon seeing this to saying that I'm sort of too old to be vertical, but but the vertical approach was taken up by a bunch of very brilliant young scholars, mid 2015, et cetera, et cetera. And once you start looking at the work that they've done, or some of the thought that I've been doing around it, which then tends up to be very much like what they're working on, are these kind of vertical possibilities. Two of them come to my mind as really overwhelming. One of them being that all of the cantos 6 are about politics. And the first of the cantos 6 about politics are a glutton sitting around in slop in, the canto 6 of the Inferno, hating Florence and screaming at Dante and throwing dirt into his mouth. And when he's not talking, he's talking about how awful Florence is, and he's seeing how it's going to fall apart in the future very soon, et cetera, et cetera. So that's character A, glutton in slime. Purgatorio, then, in canto 6, goes immediately to a troubadour, Sordello, who wrote not just love poetry, but also wrote political poetry. And he is the one who writes this extraordinarily intense sort of aside in which he just goes, I said, can you possibly, and it goes on for like a page and a half. I mean, he just loses it. And then, Canto 6 Paradiso, Justinian, the emperor, the only character in the whole poem to have an entire canto just to himself. And it's about how Rome conquered the world. And, but every canto 6, political. And then the other one that the one that's my favorite, which doesn't come up much, but it was, I had a professor, a wonderful professor, a brilliant professor when I first studied Dante, who worried endlessly about how you write something in these three radically different contexts, that you've got to figure out a way to write in infernal ways and a way to write in purgatorial ways and a way to, and ways to write in paradisiac ways. And what was so interesting about that is that what he came up with was that it was all about, that is to say, the threes all had a very significant moment which was about writing and the challenge of writing in a context that is something like the thing, that is to say, hell is so full of heavy material kind of forcing you down context of just thingness. It's very thingy. And so that is the piece that you have in Canto 1 Inferno, and it speaks to the moment where you turn from Canto 2 to Canto 3, and what you see is exactly what Dante saw. So that is writing coming as close as it can come to the thing that the character is experiencing. Then you go to the middle one, there you go to the Purgatorio, and there you have a long conversation with someone named Manfred, who has a scar that goes right across his face and through one of his eyebrows. So you've got a white surface with a dark line across it. So this is actually like what writing is. It's putting dark lines on white surfaces. And then the ultimate one is in Paradiso, this moment in which he describes what's going on as looking like a white pearl on a white forehead, which is to say, invisible. So that white pearl on the white forehead is white on white, therefore cannot be seen. It's about all of the sort of transparency and the difficulty of anything seeming contextual or heavy-handed or whatever in paradise, because it's all whiteness. And but that's, the Canto 1s are going to give us the 3 formats for how to write the poem, basically. So at any rate, I think the vertical, stay working in the vertical zone, because it's really interesting. It really is, and there's a lot to be gained there. So, okay, great, thank you. Hi there.
So we're going to finish off and kind of coming full circle and talking about the role of the reader in the Purgatorio and how that connects to the role of the reader across the Divine Comedy. And here we have a very cute illustration of Statius and Dante and Virgil kind of in Canto 26 of Purgatorio. All the poets together. Oh, okay, Statius. Okay.
Introduce yourself.
Huh?
Just introduce yourself.
Oh,
You
yeah,
both.
I am so sorry. My name is Sankirtana. I'm a senior. I'm a Romance Languages and Psychology major here.
My name is
Microphone.
Hello, Nancy. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure.
Piacere. My name is Meenakshi. I am a super senior and a Italian literature major with a minor in Africana studies. Yes. And also, I just wanted to say a couple words about how it's exciting to have you kind of intergenerationally arrive in the pedagogical context of the practice of scholarship of Dante's comedy, because of how special and meaningful and kind of particularly potent the Italian department at Bryn Mawr College is. So,
I'll say a word or two as we close about that.
Yeah, no, I definitely have to second that as we get into our last presentation topic and talking about the role of the reader in terms of how Purgatorio engages with the lessons to be learned from the Divine Comedy. And so one of the principal aspects to touch upon has really been the role of Purgatorio as an educative and prescriptive canticle, because it is the midway canticle between the better-known hell and paradise, between those better-known extremes. Purgatorio is like the most original creation of Dante, and as such has the most amount of world building that is centered specifically on what Dante wanted Purgatorio to mean and what the lessons he wanted people to take away theologically, morally, in a very interdisciplinary context, as all our classmates have said. And specifically, one way in which we can see how prescriptive Purgatorio is supposed to be for the reader is the very famous Canto 16, which is the halfway point of the entire Divine Comedy, as well as roughly the halfway point of Purgatorio itself. And this is really dedicated as a kind of meta commentary, rather than meet another character who is teaching Dante lessons, rather than climbing through one of the terraces of Purgatorio. This is actually fully dedicated to Virgil himself lecturing Dante about free will and love and the basis of actions and sins, not just in Purgatorio, but how the relationship between sins, love, and free will kind of prefigure the journey that a person has the potential to make in order to be redeemed from their sins and be able to ascend to Paradiso. And if I had to quote Canto 16, I would be quoting the entire thing, and it would take up several slides, so only briefly paraphrasing how the prescriptive nature of Purgatorio really comes across in the amount of philosophy that's put into it as the most direct example of how Dante wanted to educate the reader, how Dante wanted to make the entire Divine Comedy as a lesson, a manual, an instruction manual almost, and was able to use his original world building of the Purgatorio as a way to kind of slip in and provide a story-based context, narrative context for the lessons that he wanted to impart. And alongside that comes the fact that Purgatorio is arguably the canticle most associated with metamorphosis and transformation, because many of my classmates, and something that Meenakshi is going to touch on as well, is the ability of even pagan souls to transform and be transported to the afterlife. There's a lot in the figure of Statius, who becomes the third guide. There is the aspect of like living a double life, having the secret Christianity, having that secret salvation, and what capacity, in what capacity repenting and recognizing and converting, the conversion narrative that you mentioned previously, how, and Purgatorio really lays down, again in the world building sense, the rules for this kind of process, and how souls are actually able to achieve this in Purgatorio. And because of this, and because Inferno is principally concerned with the fact that they don't have awareness of the fact that they said that their punishment is eternal, there's not going to be a change there, and it's mostly Dante essentially learning what not to do. But once Purgatorio hits, there becomes the concept of metamorphosis, to really honestly borrow an idea from Ovid, is the point that people are capable of change, that there are forces and strategies and principles that make a person capable of changing and achieving, in Dante's eyes, the ultimate beatitude, salvation, that is going to be explored. Again, we haven't read it yet, but in Paradiso, that's going to be explored. And in that sense, in talking about the role, of the reader, and how there's this kind of narrative of how the reader is perceiving Dante's lessons, and Dante himself as the kind of purveyor of his lessons, I'm going to turn it over to Meenakshi.
Yes. I want to follow up on Sankirtana's points to think about this beautiful potentiality of metamorphosis and the Purgatorio specifically as in the context of a kind of birth, and the comedy itself being a poem about births in a sense, in as much as these mentors are like guides, as Virgil is a guide who the maternal and paternal sense of leadership are very much problematic and generative and fluid and a little queer, and this kind of centrality of birth to the comedy. I want to quote a couple of parts from the Purgatorio. In 21, Statius is my name. On earth men often say it, I sang of Thebes and then of great Achilles, but fell along the way with the second burden. The sparks that kindled the fire in me came from the holy flame, from which more than 1,000 have been lit. I mean the Aeneid. When I wrote my poems, it was my mamma and my nurse. Without it, I would not have weighed a dram. And so the kind of power and potentiality of the poem itself to nurture and to be this material, maternal figure, figura in a sense. And I also want to bring up in Canto 30 just the abandonment of Dante and the mentions of maternity and paternity in this sense. In 30, around 45. I turn to my left with the confidence a child has running to his mamma when he is afraid or in distress, to say to Virgil, not a single drop of blood remains in me that does not tremble. I know the signs of the ancient flame. But Virgil had departed, leaving us bereft. Virgil, sweetest of fathers. Virgil, to whom I gave myself for my salvation. And not all our ancient mother lost, could save my cheeks, washed in the dew, from being stained again with tears. And I just kind of want to move to also thinking about the svilupparsi, the development and the birth and the project of Purgatorio as a new metaphor and invention, both in the religious and literary sense, that Dante exacts as like the poet and the creator, kind of calling attention to how there's a risk associated with love and creation, and God, like the way that God in creating us risks not being loved. And I'm going to quote your beautiful article, Seeing as Believing, from right around the first page. In Dante's scripted rendering of God's visible speech, multiple categories of subtext, epic, hagiographical, scriptural, and sculptural, surface at once. Dante's reader is summoned to active participation, for it is up to that reader to provide the absent but essential context, to persist in fulfilling a task, implicitly outlined earlier in the Cantico. In exitu Israel de Egitto, cantavano tutti insieme ad una voce con quanto di quel salmo e poscia scritto. Purgatorio 2, 46-48. The operation of the poscia scripto of the context brought to the text. The operation of the poscia scripto of the context brought to the text by the reader is the central concern of this study. And so, thinking about the reader experiencing Dante himself, experiencing the opportunity to be the poet and to endure the journey of examining hell and ascending through the Purgatorio as well.
Yeah, and with that, on that note, actually, we're going to start going into the last words, of the presentation, which is really talking about how this idea of the reader experiencing the journey plays into the awareness that Dante has as the poet in bringing this metatextuality and awareness. The very first lines of Purgatorio are, I'm going to now speak of the second kingdom, and he finishes off Purgatorio by saying, well, all the pages I had set out for the Purgatorio are full now, so I'm gonna move on now. And he displays this awareness of like the act of writing for a reader, the act of writing to be read, not solely as a manner of production for himself, but because he knows he's in dialogue with a second party. And this is something that Inferno does not have this. Inferno starts very famously with kind of in media res with him saying, I found myself in the middle of the dark woods, and it ends in media res too with Dante and Virgil climbing up to see the stars. But Purgatorio starts and ends with a very specific awareness that Dante wants the reader to have about Purgatorio, about the lessons that have been imparted, and about the way in which this specific, like, prescriptive canticle with all of its lessons and all of its mediations on like the middleman nature and what to be in the intermediary stage, almost like the liminal space between the two extremes, becomes like his way of really making sure that the reader has an active engagement with the text. Yeah. And on that note, our question is, bearing all this in mind, what do you think is significant about Dante's shift of guide from Virgil to Beatrice happening at the end of Purgatorio as part of Purgatorio instead of, say, at like the start of Paradiso, in a similar way that if that had been the case, it would be like a parallel to when Virgil appears, but instead it's contained as part of the text of Purgatorio.
Yeah, I think that is to say, as I look at that question,
my first thought is that Virgil can't go to paradise. You know, that he is not permitted to set foot in that territory. That is not part of the divine organization of this trip. The line of his departure, that moment when Dante says, I recognize the something of the ancient flame, which is actually from the Aeneid. It's a quotation from the Aeneid, and I think it's Dido when she first meets Aeneas. Yes, it's Dido at the moment that she meets Aeneas and says to her nurse, I recognize the something of the ancient, falling in love again. Great. So that particular line is probably the line that, you know, that he turns back to Virgil and Virgil had left us. Everyone who gets themselves into the Dante scene, that is their big let's all fall apart line. You know, the loss of Virgil is perhaps the most painful moment in the whole poem. And so it's really just quite an extraordinary thing. So that, but at any rate, going to the question, and you said so many interesting things that if I still had a brain, I would comment on. But I can't reconstruct them sufficiently to, you know, think interestingly about them. But all in all, most of all, it's that it's just that Virgil really can't be permitted to go to paradise. And also we have to have Beatrice be really nasty for a while, which she does at the top of Purgatorio. And you don't want to begin paradise with Beatrice telling Dante what a jerk he is. At any rate, but thank you. I mean, all of this, you've all been just so much fun to get back with the young ones. I'm teaching Dante to octogenarians. They really loved it.
They love it. No, they're so happy.
They're so happy with it because they know that they're near. That it's at hand, you know? Yeah, exactly. So anyhow, thanks to all of you. This is just, I learned so much from you, so thank you, really. Terrific.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you for your attention. Yeah, I think that was wonderful, and to echo Meenakshi's words, really from a pedagogical point of view, I really enjoyed this intergenerational encounter on Dante. So I always tell students that I really hope that, teaching this class, some future Dantes are coming up. I always encourage them to be Dantes. They are Dantes. I mean,
they know what they're doing.
They know.
They really, I mean, a tribute to you.
No.
But
not at all.
also to them. You know, I mean, they know what they're doing, and they're really thinking in difficult ways about it. So they're terribly impressive.
Yeah.
And of course, I knew that Bryn Mawr.
Yes, they are.
Yes.
And so I think it was great for them to meet, a distinguished Dantes like you. So thank you so much, Nancy. We have 5 minutes for some questions from the audience, if you don't mind, Nancy, to take just a couple of questions from the audience. Thank you so much, Kim.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you very much, Professor Vickers. That was really great. And thank you to all the students for your presentations, your questions. I really enjoyed them. Really great work. And
who are you?
Oh, sorry, yes. I'm Giulio Genovese, and I'm a visiting assistant professor here at Bryn Mawr in the Italian department.
And a Dante scholar.
And a Dante scholar as well. Just defended my dissertation on Dante. Thank you very much. And so I was wondering, especially, I believe it was Eleanor and Lucy's presentation about the structure of the comedy. I was always fascinated, of course, by its structure, and you mentioned, of course, the political cantos, the 6 cantos in each cantica. And since we were talking about Canto 10 of the Purgatorio, we touched upon Canto 12. I was thinking of, those 3 cantos, the Canto 10, Canto 11, Canto 12, as a sort of structural unity in which Dante is in the terrors of pride.
Right.
But so we get from the ekphrasis of the Canto 10, which Dante describes the examples of humility, and then in Canto 12 we have the examples of pride. And in the middle of it, of course, we have Oderisi da Gubbio's words about Dante as a poet. He mentions the 2 Guidos, that of course, and someone who will come and be better than them. So I was wondering what you thought about this kind of structural unity within this 3 cantos, and the fact that in the middle one, Canto 11, so we have 10 and 12 the Dante describing art, divine art, and then this discourse around poetry in 11 and Dante's role as a poet.
It structures that way more or less throughout the Purgatorio. But yes, so you've got sort of the beginning and the end of it, and then in the middle you actually have the conversation with the penitents who are doing their time. We just a momentary, and then you're going to. If I lose track of where we were, you're going to take me back to it. Okay.
Yes.
I just want to interject that, of course, purgatory. It was basically invented in Dante's lifetime. There is a wonderful book on this by somebody named Jacques Le Goff, which is called The Birth of Purgatory. If you look at the Bible, there is very little hell and very little heaven and no purgatory whatsoever. And it is largely also invented in relationship to what was going on commercially in the Italy of that day, which is to say that there is a huge sort of financial expansion going on, and that part of what's also going on is all of these buying of indulgences. You know, as you take every terrace, everybody comes running to Dante because A, he's cast a shadow, which means he's alive, which means he's going back, and oh, by the way, would you tell my cousin, Claudia, to start praying for me, and Claudia will run off to the church and she will pay the requisite number of dollars to have her, indulgences go to work, and that will speed up their ability to get out. So now remind me of where we were before I had to do my digression
So
on
the structural unity of these
okay.
cantos.
So this, yes, and so what's going on in the middle canto is actually, at least in this particular triad, it is a lengthy set of conversations with various people who do the plates for books. Some of the most famous people who do the beautiful scenes that we see in manuscripts there. And then, we do talk about Giotto, who Dante knew. We do talk about artists, et cetera, et cetera. So, and they're all doing their penance by wandering around with huge rocks on their backs. And Dante is having to bend over to talk to them the whole while. But it's staying in the arts zone. It's sort of the conversation is all about artists and what direction the arts are going in and how useless it is to be famous, because it passes very quickly, So so you've got the sort of opening piece and the closing piece, and then this period where you actually get to talk to the penitents, and I think that it does that. I would have to go back and look at it to see if it does that frequently in the Purgatorio, but I'd put money on it that it's got that kind of structure to it.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Kate Thomas in the Department of Literatures and English, and I have a very gestural question for you, Nancy, which is gestural, because I know nothing. So I'm just here as a complete layperson. But this was fabulous. Thank you, amazing presenters. I loved that. I learned so much. And I was thinking all the way through of another lecture I'd attended in which I learned a lot. And it was given by an archaeologist, Lynn Lancaster, about the making of Trajan's column.
Yes.
And so as everybody was talking about structure and ways of reading and verticality and the spiral, and I was thinking about how Professor Lancaster had taught me how Trajan's column was probably erected.
Yes.
So it just led me to thinking about ways of reading vis-a-vis ways of making. And especially perhaps as you educated me about, how people were bringing their own contexts to the reading of Dante and filling in the stories that lay behind it. I was just thinking, well, people think about the making of it too. And apparently, in this theory, the making of the column was that it both rose vertically and then horizontally to be put together and then to allow this spiral reading. So I have no expertise or knowledge. I'm just wondering if you could muse with me upon the making of something structurally vis-a-vis the reading of it.
Anything? Or
don't know.
The making of something I mean, the whole question of how Dante made this poem. How many of you saw the PBS film that aired recently? And I had a fantasy of what it was going to be, which would have been tedious and very boring, and was not what it ended up being, which turned out, I think, after my initial disappointment of not seeing what I thought I was going to see, it turned out to be a great lesson to me, which was the lesson of really embracing the fact that this was an exiled man writing this poem, and that he was basically wandering around Italy. Now, he was going to some, am I doing that? To some households. He was, or not households, but chateaus, etc., where they probably had a library, and that, he could probably have a place to sit and write, etc., etc. But there was also a vast amount of just wandering around, carrying this partially written, little project on his back, etc. And once you get there, you have to start thinking about what a miracle it is to have made that poem, and how it could possibly, it had to be sort of start and stop. It had to be, it just, and it certainly does have unevenness within it at certain moments. But what is, for me, the most extraordinary thing is the whole question of someone who was fundamentally without family, without home, without his own library, which was taken away from him by the Florentines, who is, off wandering and tasting. One of my favorite lines in it is about the difficulty of knowing the taste of other man's bread. Because of course the bread in Florence is not salted. And so, yes, the bread in Florence is not salted. And so, at any rate, where my sort of fantasy was building, I've had a lot of time spent on working on the construction of, and I would love to meet this friend of yours someday and get back to it. But for me, really, today's mystery about making something is how a man who was going through what he was going through could possibly have made what he made. It's just, the people who, there's a wonderful new book out called Dante's Bones. It's actually a couple years old, by somebody named Guy Raffa, and it's terrific. It's sort of a page turner. But, there are comments by many of the people who were moving Dante's bones around about how the size of his cranium was expansive. So consequently, but yes, the whole Trajan question, I think there are more layers to go with it. If I ever had the energy to sit down and do it, I would try to put myself back into it a little. There's one little footnote somewhere that Ron Martinez, who's a kind of full-time Dantiste, wrote, who his comment about the essay was, and Nancy Vickers thinks. Okay, lady, prove it to me. So I may someday just try to undo that little footnote.
Thank you.
So I know that you're a purgatorist. You focus more on the Purgatorio, but I have consistently asked this question at all of the Italian events I've gone to. And have you by any chance encountered Hosier's Unreal Unearthed and its work with the Inferno? Because something Sasha and I have bonded over is how fascinating we find it to be.
So, and what is this?
It's an album. It's a music album that's basically covering all of the circles of hell as portrayed in Dante's Inferno. It's fascinating and it's very wonderful, and I just feel obligated to ask about it or inform.
Okay. I feel obligated to try and remember it because it sounds really interesting.
I can email it.
Can you email it? It is, at least for the moment, njvickers@brynmawr.edu.
Okay.
It's not a tough one.
Okay.
But it may go away soon, so be prepared.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Ciao, Professor Vickers.
Ciao.
I just want to ask you, as Eleanor just mentioned, that you are a purgatorist, and as someone who I think felt a very emotional attachment to the Inferno for a long time and couldn't leave it before taking this course and being obligated to endure the entire journey, and which is beautiful and it's redemptive, and that's kind of what my question is about. How, like, the language of purgatory is about souls who are working towards redemption, and just from like your perspective as a professor and a teacher and a Dantist and a purgatorist and a scholar, teaching others about this work, what do you think about, like, in your own life, the potential for the purgatory and the comedy in general to be transformative from a morally instructive kind of perspective, in a spiritual sense?
Yeah, I think it's working on me that way. Now, I've been very careful to always make an announcement before I'm about to teach, because when I start to talk about it, obviously I'm talking it from I'm talking about it basically from the text's point of view. And but I do find as I get older and start thinking about the afterlife more than I previously did, it's reading slightly differently on this, which is probably now my 25th or 26th read through of it. So yes, I mean it is very powerful, and I've had students who actually have been converted is too strong a word, but students who have actually had their lives changed by reading it. And what my octogenarians, several of my octogenarians are now taking my Dante class the second time, because they literally were just transformed by it, and want to come back to it again. Yeah. So it does its work. It does what it set out to do in some very powerful ways.
And speaking of pride, I think that Dante would be proud of that, because that's exactly what
he was.
He was taking his work very seriously. So I know there are many other questions, but maybe we can ask over a glass, over some food. We have a reception waiting for us in the cloisters. But before going to our reception, let me just really thank the students who did an excellent job. So please give them a round of applause. And yes, we will get to paradise eventually. And thank you all for joining us for this event. And of course, thank you very much, Nancy, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And before the reception, shall we have a picture, a group picture with the students?
I can take it.
Oh,
Right.
And this yeah, thanks.
Yeah, we go over
Very good. All right, so what are you going to do?
Oh, that's here. So, yeah.